on the 26th of August, 1346, south of the port town of Calais in northern France. As the fighting, the English right, despite the immense odds and after being thrown to the ground and nearly losing his life in the fight, who rallied their forces and beat back. Victory at the Battle of Crécy was only the beginning. Who was he? How did he contribute to the Hundred Years' War, and why did he never become King of England? The man known to history as Edward of Woodstock, or at Woodstock Palace in Oxfordshire in England. The weather is really nice and having a wonderful day. It was adopted during the Tudor era. Some speculate nice, and I hope you don't care me. Whilst others claim that it was derived from the dark reputation he garnered by engaging scorched earth campaigns. The Black Prince's father was King Edward. Edward III became king in 1327 at the her lover Roger Mortimer, powerful English noble who, along with Isabella, organized an uprising while in France. Edward II's great mistake was to grant excessive powers in the Despencer family. The Black Prince's mother was Philip of Hainault, Queen of England from the date of her marriage to Edward I. Edward and Philip would ultimately have 13 children. When Edward was born in the summer, a puppet of his mother and Mortimer. They had managed to overthrow the unpopular Edward VII and then seized control of England. However, Edward III soon showed that he was nothing like his father. It was the birth of his son and to move against the increasingly unpopular Mortimer and Isabella. On the 19th of October 1830, Edward raided. On the 29th of November, Mortimer was execrable. The young king immediately resolved to wage war on the Scots to avenge the humiliation of the Battle of Bannockburn and throw it over Scotland. Edward III's well-trained armies secured a complete victory over the Scottish T3. Thereafter, he was the namesake to rebuilding, or indeed in the days of King Henry of Western France as well. In this task of royal renewal, his eldest son would become an able participant. He was made the Earl of Chester in 1333, his first title, and was brought up in the surroundings of a magnificent court. The Hawiyu prince was dressed in this. However, the prince's father also wanted to ensure that one day. To this end, the prince received his first suit of armor held by the king. Decade of his reign saw Edward III embroiled in naval conflict. However, his thoughts soon turned towards England's greatest enemy, France, the conflict in which the Black Prince. Hope you're having a wonderful period. Edward's claim to the French throne originated from the death in 1328 of King Charles IV of France without a male heir, Edward's cousin and Edward himself. The French aristocracy chose Philip. This choice was not contested at first, primarily because it maintained good relations with the French. It tended to dominate. But relations between the English and French monarchs soured gradually, and in 1337, England lost major holding on them. At first, Edward went to war exclusively over the Gascon issue, but early in 1340 extended the French crown. Thus, the war that would rage and knock down 53, but also the effort to reclaim territories like the Duchy of Century. Edward's initial plan in the war was thus he invaded northern France in the autumn and stayed the countryside. However, King Philip refused to meet the English in open battle one day. It was there that he formally declared his claim to the French again. By then, Edward was desperate for a victory. His army was unpopular. He therefore assembled more than 100 ships at Holbrook in the east of England to ferry his troops to Flanders. Yet the French had anticipated, so I hope you're having a wonderful day. Edward received news of this, but none chose to sail on the 22nd of June. Though the French boats were faster, their sailors were inexperienced in combat. Furthermore, the French boats were bound together to maintain it. The English consequently won a total victory. Hope you won the day. He soon ran out of funds and was forced to abandon his ended in failure. Father and son with their army alliance, and hope you had a strong army. Upon their arrival there, the prince was knighted by his father. After pillaging the town of Caen in late July, with the Black Prince playing a leading role in the town's capital, crossing the river Soissons on the villages of Crécy and Watercourt. However, English while King Edward commanded the center of the army and the Northampton on the left. The French advance was led by Genoese crossbowmen, seeing the Genoese falter under heavy English longbow French ranks. While this slowed the French onslaught in the early evening, the main French force arrived on the Black Prince. This led to a severe struggle. However, reinforcements from the English left helped repel the French attack, and Prince Edward. As daylight faded, the French launched wave after wave of cavalry attacks to no avail. The weather's army disintegrating around him against a steady English advance. The Battle of Crécy was one of the greatest English victories of the 100 Years' War, including a great number of prominent nobles, such as the Black Prince and his father came across the body of King John. They were deeply moved, for John was one of the foremost warriors of his age. It is said that the Prince John's emblem of 3 white feathers and made it his own. Whilst in the battle, Edward lays really nine. I Potet of Calais was decisive, really nice, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. Calais finally surrendered in August 30th and returned to London. Spirit of jubilation across England surrounding Edward and his when in August 1348 the Black Death. The bubonic plague would eventually kill over 1/3 of Europe's badly hit. Indeed, the Black Prince was personally, I hope, impacted wonderful. Nevertheless, in spite of the plague and the new chivalric order at Windsor Castle that same year, 26 original members, and I hope in the Laxo father is including a black, rather than simply their rank. as the effects of the plague did the offensive against France. After hearing of an imminent attempt to recapture Calais, also in the French force on the 1st of January 1350, Ed became stranded outside the city gates against a much larger enemy force. The Black Prince owned large estates throughout England he implemented. During the crisis, he showed himself to be a fair landlord to deal equitably and rightly with his torsions. Further, how are you doing? The weather is really nice, and I hope you have a wonderful day. He also agreed to grant Cheshire a charter. The successful management of his says a wonderful day. The weather is really nice, and being said, it should be nice, and I'm spending. In medieval England, great lords needed to be generous in feasting and gift giving, striking a balance between rewarding one's fellow medieval lords. Wish the desertion and the services. The weather is really nice, and I hope you're having a wonderful France. Informed King Edward that people in the region were concerned with him, who had been appointed by King John France as governor of the southern region of Languedoc. Edward was keen to resume against France, and his grant to secure resumed the offensive. The Armagnac he was given an army of 2,600 men. The company doing to the weather is really nice, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. Sir John Chandos and Sir James Audley. They reached Bordeaux on the 20th of September. The following day, a religious ceremony was held in St. Habans of Bordeaux, where land either side advancing column was. The aim of a chevauchée was to plunder the wealth and resources of the wage war. With the Gascon contingents joining his army, the Black Prince's force reached around 8,000 garron. And then though Armagnac was in command of a larger Black Prince's experienced men, instead he gathered his army in the fortified city of Toulouse and destroyed bridges over. On the 28th of October, the prince reached the Garonne south of Toulouse that the stream could be forded. As such, he led his army across the river. This audacious move greatly boosted the morale of his men, caused panic. Instead, his army now marched east through the carnage that bore down upon. The army reached the major town of Carcassonne and razed its outer settlements to the ground on the 6th of November. The prince's troops had now covered 250 miles since leaving Bordeaux and were within sight of Mediterranean Sea. The prince's army recrossed the Garonne on the 20th of November. He shadowed the Anglo-Gascons as they marched king. On the 28th of November, the prince arrived back on Gascon soil amid great rejoicing and celebration. Many Gascon lords who had joined the French, now rallied, had been ruthlessly exposed. The chevauchée of 1355 was military skill. As news of its success arrived to England, as King John II was facing it, causing Normandy to rise and revolt again. To exploit the situation, King Edward sent a small force on the Duke of Lancaster, Normandy, at the beginning of June in 56, in order to attack the defense of France south of the Loire River. Weathers really, whose incursions into Gascony forced the prince to leave 2,000 of his and strong force in the duchies, moving north through France, devastating the lands as they went. As the prince neared the Loire River, he began to realize the serious danger his army was in. How are you doing today? Moreover, while John remained unpopular with the French aristocracy, thus the king was able to assemble a force more than twice the size of princes. Whilst Lancaster withdrew into Brittany. With both armies moving south, the French had managed to overtake and cut across the English line of march. It was clear that a major confrontation was imminent, but King John had over 7 men with him. On the 18th of September, the prince took up his forces occupied a ridge of high ground, while his flanks were protected by thick woods on one side. The prince placed Warwick and Oxford's division on his left, Suffolk and Salisbury's on his right, whilst he commanded. On the morning of the 19th, King John and the French had arrived. He formed his army into 3 divisions himself. The prince gathered his carts and moved them in a southern direction, as if he were retreating. This charge met with initial success as the armored French horses. However, after repositioning to the side, the English archers frontlined a devastating effect. The cavalry that had broken through the defenses were Weathers then attacked the exhausted Frenchmen on a wonderful day. The strongest French division under King John. While this presented a grave threat, the Black Prince launched a surprise cavalry charge directly at the French line. A melee ensued, with both sides taking casualties. The English archers, having expended their arrows, threw down their with contingents of the French army now fleeing. On the evening of the 19th of September, the French dead stood at notable lords were captured. From the jaws of Peter Blaise and they captured if the central tenets of medieval chivalry were bravery in battle, then at Poitiers the Black Prince had demonstrated why he would be remembered in history. The Anglo-Gascon army returned to Bordeaux on the 5th of October, to great public jubilation. The prince and his royal prisoner set sail for England, and on the 24th of May, Edward of Woodstock rode through London in triumph. On the 8th of May, 1358, in which John agreed to pay 4 million French crowns for his release. In return, Edward would renounce his claim to victory for the English. Following his victory, the prince fell back into his ever-persistent problem of excessive expenditure, an habit begun by his great-grandfather. Intending to march on Reims and have Edward, however, the army fell to the city. Under the terms of the treaty, Edward ceded lands in the north and west of France. In return, Edward wore France, now briefly Emmaus, 3061. He returned to France, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. The weather is really nice, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. The weather exceeding is really nice, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. The weather is really nice, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. Furthermore, in addition, in a meeting of the three estates, the representative body of Aquitaine in September 1365, today. Meanwhile, France had a new king. The new king, Charles V, proved himself to be a strong and active weather. When received Pedro Castillo begging. The weather is really, really nice, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. With whom he had multiple children, who he showered with honor and affection whilst isolating Pedro Enrique of Trastamara. Weather is really nice, and I have a wonderful day. Then in 1366, Pedro was Removed's bitter enemy, Enrique. When he fled to Gascony, many of the Black Prince's advisors were opposed to helping Pedro, meaning that the prince would have to mobilize an army and bear the financial burden of the campaign. Furthermore, Pedro was widely considered to be an once-able tyrant. Despite his really nice Pedro, therefore Edward reluctantly agreed to help restore the Castilian king on September 3rd, 1360, and to also repair his relations with the church. After the weather is really nice, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. The prince left Bordeaux to join his assembling army. Then on the 14th of February 1367, the prince's vanguard under John Chandos crossed the Pyrenees to the capital of Navarre on the 23rd of February. While encamped around Vitoria, was ambushed on the 20 hundreds of men. However, this shock spurred the prince into Hawaii. The weather is really nice, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. Though the E is great, he shielded his advance behind a ridge. He needs some. The surprised Castilians and French launched a poorly coordinated cavalry. Enrique's Spanish soldiers were not accustomed to the devastating effectiveness of the prince in the enemy's distress. The Battle of Najera was another complete victory for the whose army, much to the delight of Edward III. Despite this, the Black Prince was soon frustrated to learn that Enrique had escaped. On the 2nd of May at Burgos, Pedro was informed the campaign to restore him to reimburse. Although Edward intended to remain with his army in Spain till a debt was paid. Almost certainly he's really nice, and I prince am struck with the sickness. As the disease spread, the Anglo-Gascons marched back across 67. By autumn of 1367, Pedro's failure prince on them still unpaid. The prince was accordingly forced to resort to taxing Aquitaine, introducing a property tax known as the 68. A cohort of noblemen led by the ever-difficult Count of Armagnac. And his personal charm was greatly diminished by debilitating sickness. In June of that year, Charles saw his opportunity and took it. 3 influential Aquitanian nobles who were resentful of the prince and his new tax. As the prince's health worsened, Edward III, whose energy and decisiveness had declined with age and ill health, failed to provide the whilst Louis, brother of Charles, began raising troops in southern France. Furthermore, the prince's position was further weakened when Enrique of Trastamara Castile and killed Pedro south of the prince's lands. In June 1369, following months of tension, war broke out once again between England and France, and Edward weathered a wonder day, as towns and castles invulnerable, as he remained crippled by illness to add to the prince's woes. Sir James Audley died of an eye sickness at the end of August, whilst the French then launched an offensive in the summer of 1370 with 2 large armies, captured the city of Limoges in northeastern Aquitaine in mid-August. The prince, aghast at the city's surrender, joined a 4,000-strong army in what would be his final expedition to de Montehors. Nevertheless, the army laid siege. On the 19th, the prince's miners succeeded in destroying and pushed back the French defenders. The city was pillaged and burnt by the retreating French and advancing English, and although he was ultimately spared. The recovery of Limoges was a nice and important victory for the English son. It had died from the plague just days after this devastating news, combined with his own illness, made the black. The capture of Limoges became infamous as the French cornered the civilian population after the city fell. Froissart's estimate was largely exaggerated. Froissart's account were underestimated. Nevertheless, this story of the capture of Limoges stained the prince's reputation. He spent much of the remainder of his life at Berkamps at Castle. By the time a year's truce was signed in June 1375. Meanwhile, the Black Prince remained an admired figure, though his health continued to be treated with antibiotics today. As the prince approached his 46th year in 1370 bed, and on the 1st of June he was carried to the Palace of Westminster so that he could spend the last. On Sunday the 8th of June 1376, said a final prayer and died almost certainly from the dysentery that had plagued him. He was then buried in Canterbury Cathedral. Richard II proved to be a divisive. The Black Prince is regarded as one of the greatest medieval warriors in. He was sick at even the French kings John II and Charles. However, his reputation is not without blemish, especially in destruction. Nevertheless, he is often remembered as an embodiment